Yeah, goddamn it. That's right. That's right. Yeah, for those of you guys there who are wondering who that was, that's the late Tim Dog. I'm thinking of all this beef that Eddie Murphy's having these days with past adversaries like Bill Cosby, and another person who could be put on that list is Spike Lee, because I know him and Spike Lee had a little bit of a little beef back in the '80s, and when Eddie Murphy called him a cricket and said he looked like Jimmy the Cricket or a grasshopper on the Arsenio Hall show. Yeah, Murphy has had a reputation of taking shots at other brothers for some reason, and Bill is definitely the brunt of that. So I want to talk a little bit about that because he seems to have a lot of animosity towards Bill Cosby that still hasn't gone away. I was watching the show with Jerry Seinfeld, Comedians in Cars, and he was talking about years ago when he was first starting off and he was first starting to get some momentum in the business and making a name for himself. But before I get into that, I just forgot. Please subscribe to the channel, like the page, and possibly share it and push the notification button so anyone who listens to this will get a notification that the new video has arrived. So anyway, this is Rob from Rob's Rants, and I'm going to talk about your boy Eddie Murphy, youngest cast member at 19 years old, took the comedy world by storm, did something that was unprecedented for the time and probably for any time in the history of comedy for someone of his stature, and particularly for a black man of his stature. He starred in the widely popular hip television show Saturday Night Live as the headliner, and he single-handedly saved that show, and he's arguably probably the greatest performer to be on that program. I think he's the greatest performer to be on that program. Definitely, I think the most prolific and most instrumental person for that program. But anyway, I digress. But I don't want to talk about Eddie Murphy's credentials. I'm going to talk a little bit about his undying feud with Bill Cosby, his arch nemesis, Bill Cosby. And he has seemed to have this animosity towards Bill that goes all the way back to the 1980s from what he talked about. I'm really pretty sure many of you guys saw the movie Raw back in 1987 when it came out, and he got up on concert and talked about how Bill Cosby called him up over the phone and chastised him when he said, "I would like to talk to you about some of the things that you have said on your show. And flour and filth, and you cannot talk that way in front of people," et cetera, et cetera. He made those jokes. And in interviews, he's actually talked about how Bill Cosby really did that. But the most interesting thing is that there was an article that was written in the Washington Post where Bill Cosby actually addressed a lot of those rumors in his alleged feud that he had with Eddie Murphy. And according to Cosby actually said that the confrontation didn't go down like that, or the discussion didn't go down like that. He was just trying to give him some advice in terms of how to deal with his money, and that was really all that it was. But it wasn't him, questioning him on him using profanity in his act or anything like that. So Cosby has a totally different version in terms of what Eddie Murphy has presented to the public for all these years. But that's neither here nor there. So that's what Bill has actually said. So I'm not here to take sides. I'm just presenting a fair perspective in terms of all of this. So I know there's been other people as well who have made these claims about Bill Cosby, like D.L. Hughley and as well as some other actors as well. So I don't know who to believe. I wasn't there. But I think that the fair thing is to make sure that, or to show that Bill has a perspective about this too. So he could have said it, didn't said it. But what I wanted to talk about is Eddie Murphy's feud against this man. That this does not seem to go away. It doesn't seem to go away. And I thought about this. And I'm like, even if Cosby was as nasty to him as Eddie Murphy says in that one encounter, does that warrant having a confrontation or being angry at someone for 30 years about it? I mean, are you that are you that fragile in terms of your constitution that all it takes is somebody to sit up and to criticize you one time, that you hold a grudge against them for the rest of your life for 30 freaking years? Really? I mean, at some point, you have to let it go, man. At some point, you got to man the fuck up. At some point, you can't sit up and hold grudges about things because somebody said something to you and you that shaken up that you're just not going to let it go. You're not going to let it go. You know, he wasn't a friend of yours. He wasn't a colleague. He wasn't a colleague of yours. He was an older guy. He said something to you. You know, at some point, you got to move on and let it go. I mean, to the point where you're getting off code and you're talking crazy in front of non-black people about throwing Bill Cosby up under the bus. And the reality of it is, whether you hate Bill Cosby, whether you like Bill Cosby, whether you think Bill Cosby is a rapist, Bill Cosby was a trailblazer. Bill Cosby was the first person to win first black comedian to win an Emmy. I think it was the first black person to win an Emmy, period, for I Spy. He definitely opened up the doors for Eddie Murphy and Richard Pryor as well, because he came before Pryor. And Bill Cosby is someone that the rest of these guys, they're standing on the shoulders of Bill. The only thing I would say that Bill Cosby's probably guilty of is that Bill Cosby didn't duplicate himself, more than, he duplicated himself enough. There were some comedians he did open up the door for. I know Sinbad was one of them. To my knowledge, I know Dougie Doug was another one that he actually opened up doors for. Dougie Doug never became as big as Bill Cosby was. I know Sinbad became a household name at one point. But Bill's, comedy was a lot different than Eddie Murphy's, and the fact that his was more tailored towards family-friendly entertainment as opposed to Eddie Murphy's being, and when he first started off at least, being more of an adult-oriented humor. So, but nonetheless, at some point, man, you have to sit up and grow up and man up and let things go. I don't see that as listening to the way Eddie Murphy tells it as a reason to be mad at someone because they criticized you for three freaking decades. 3 decades, you're mad to the point where you still holding a grudge and you're about to go to tears because some dude who you barely even knew is talking to you like that? Really? I don't know. I mean, but it seems like to me, looking at a lot of these comedians, I thought about this for a second because Eddie Murphy got famous really, really young. When he got famous, he was only 19 years old. Can you imagine that? 19 years old, you're starring on a big television program. You got ladies throwing panties at you everywhere. You got money, you got fame, you got cars. All this stuff happening for you, and you're 19 years old. He was a kid when all this was happening for him. I forget this sometime because I was a little boy myself, and I didn't recognize, what was going on, how rare it was for him to have gotten all the success that he got and as quick as he got and how big he got, because he went from that to 48 Hours, which was a hit, to Trading Places, another hit, and then the Beverly Hills Cop, which was the highest grossing film domestically at the box office in 1984. Second highest grossing film internationally behind Indiana Jones and not Raiders Lost Ark, but Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom. So for you to come out the box and you're kicking Steven Spielberg's ass in the box office, you're doing something special. And that can be said for Eddie Murphy. But I tend to wonder sometimes, because he grew up in the entertainment industry, and especially because of the fact he's been famous and been rich longer than he's been poor and unfamous at this point in his life, has that stunted his growth in terms of his development as a human being? Has that stunted his growth in terms of his development as an adult? Is he still looking at the world and still behaving in a way that's immature for a guy his age? I mean, because at this point, he's almost 60 years old. He's 58 years old. He's almost 60. He's pushing 60. And he still seems to have some of the hangups and grudges that you would see with someone that's a teenager or someone that's in their 20s. I'm just saying, man. I'm just saying. And I know that everybody's different. Everybody is sensitive, in their level of sensitivity. I was just listening to Nicole's view. Shout out to Nicole if you're listening to this. And she had talked about something I totally forgot about, but I remember reading about this years ago. He had an incident with David Spade from Saturday Night Live because David Spade had made a skit about him, and he had made a skit where he was actually making fun of Eddie Murphy because Eddie Murphy had 2 movies that bombed at the box office. One of them was Pluto Nash, and I can't remember the other one, but he had back-to-back bombs. It was one of Eddie Murphy's lows in his career. And SNL poked fun at that. Eddie Murphy went ballistic because he was like, that's the house I built. And for these rap bastards to get up on there and make fun of me, it's quite ridiculous. And he actually went in on David Spade, cussed him out, went in on him, and he wasn't letting it go to the point that Chris Rock had to intervene and kind of save David Spade's ass the way that the story is told. But this is giving you some insight in terms of how sensitive, this guy is, and one could argue that because he's an artist, artists are very sensitive about their work and they don't like people making fun of what they do. And it's a very stressful industry to be in. So, when somebody sits up and they reject them, they take that stuff very, very personal. It hurts. It hurts emotionally, hurts psychologically, But I wonder sometimes, and not just him, but just a question about the entertainment industry, period, seeing these guys that has their fame and their pursuit of fame stunted their development as adults and as men. Because once again, when you're a 58-year-old man, I mean, I'm not the age of Eddie Murphy is, but things that someone told me when I was 19 years old, 18 years old, 20 years old, I'm not sitting up and still holding a grudge about it at the age I am now. I mean, at some point, you have to let that stuff go, and move on with your life. So I know he mentioned it to Jerry Seinfeld, but I just thought it was very strange, that he did, if he's telling the truth. Because, again, Cosby's recollection of the event is entirely different from his. So, but it just, like I said before, I just wonder whether or not his fame has stunted his growth, in terms of, as a person. Because chronologically, he might be 58 years old, but in terms of his emotional intelligence, the guy still might be a teenager in terms of his emotional intelligence. Especially if you're around a bunch of yes people and folks that coddle you and folks that enable you and they kiss your ass and give you whatever you want, and you don't have any accountability for your actions, the way that the regular people do. That definitely can be something that can stunt your growth. So, but anyway, those are my thoughts about that. So, I will actually see because I am a fan of Eddie Murphy. I don't like what he said about Cos, but I don't like what he said about Bill Cosby. But I still am a fan of Eddie Murphy. I think that Eddie Murphy's a very, very talented guy. Definitely, in terms of comedians of his generation, he's definitely, I think, the most talented. So I will be watching Coming to America 2 when it comes out. I'm going to check it out when I get a chance, and among other things. So, but I just wonder whether or not this dude's emotional intelligence has been stunted by all the years he's been famous, and he got famous at a very, very young age, at 19 years old. 19. At 19 years old, I was I was in college, man, at 19. But he was 19 years old. He was on top of the damn world, and it was still growing for him, So, anyway, this is Rob from Rob's Rants. Those are my 2 cents about that issue. Please, once again, like the channel, subscribe, and I will talk to you soon. Later.